Good evening. Our final speaker this weekend is nuclear physicist, author, and lecturer Stanton T. Friedman. He received his Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science degrees in physics from the University of Chicago in 1955 and 1956. He was employed for 14 years as a nuclear physicist by such companies as GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas Astronautics, and eventually canceled programs as nuclear aircraft fission and fusion rockets and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. He became interested in UFOs in 1958, and since 1967 has lectured about flying saucers at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in all 50 U.S. states, all 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries. He's published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs. 2 of his 5 phenomenal books are now optioned to be future movies. And on top of all that, he's been a dear friend of mine now, Stan, if you can believe it, for about 15 years. Stan, it's always an honor to bring you to stage, Mr. Stanton Friedman.
More than 15. It'd be nice if I could see anybody out there. It's a privilege again to once again appear at a MUFON symposium. I still hold the record for the most symposia that anybody and one person has spoken at. Hopefully that will continue. Because if it doesn't, it means I'm not around. I want to thank Dave McDonald, his staff of people, all the benefactors. I want to give my special congratulations to Kathleen Marden for being named Ufologist of the Year. She's earned it. And my goal tonight is to get you to think in a new way about us and aliens. Love them or hate them. Because I think all too often we forget how we must look to them. We think of how they look to us. And so, okay, how do I get it to move? I'm having trouble. I pushed the right arrow. Connected. Okay, I might as well tell you where I stand, besides here in Cincinnati, where I first got interested in flying saucers. Well, it was across the river, but the evidence is overwhelming that aliens are visiting us, that governments are covering up what's going on. There are no good arguments against A or B. We're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium, and journalists and scientists have grossly neglected their responsibilities. I think we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. I'm sure I can rearrange that, but I don't know how, so. I'm not touching anything. It isn't fair. In case you haven't noticed, we spend $1 trillion a year on the military. We have discovered nuclear fusion.
Are you back on track?
I think so.
Okay.
Don't ask me what I did wrong. I was just here. We have discovered nuclear fusion and fission and exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons. Fortunately, only 2 on people. We have learned how to use nuclear energy for propulsion, nuclear submarines and carriers. That's a nuclear submarine. World War II, a submarine could stay underwater for 24 hours. and it had to come to the surface. Now they can go around the planet underwater, can stay hidden, can retaliate if anybody bombs the country. It's a whole new ballgame. I love the name on that carrier. I don't know why anybody put it there, but the title. It may shock you to realize that we have built nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that can operate for 18 years without refueling. The first chain reaction was 1942. The first submarine was 1956. And of course, along the way, we decided we need to use nuclear energy for other things, not only water propulsion, but nuclear fission rockets. Now, the reactor sitting up there, the diameter is under 8 feet. The power level of its bigger brother, the Phoebus 2B, is 4,400 megawatts. That's twice the power of Hoover Dam. This operated successfully back in the 60s. I thought back then we'd have a base on the moon, we'd have gone to Mars. Some people think we have. I don't think we have yet. And we get into the technology questions where you got all kinds of people saying about flying saucer, it's impossible, you can't get here from there, and if you could get here, you couldn't move that way, so don't believe those crazy people. Well, they're missing the point. As Kathleen and I said in our book, Science Was Wrong, we have 14 chapters, each one based on a statement from a very important, very well-educated person saying it's impossible, and being proven wrong by events. I must be touching the wrong things here. These are the only equations you'll see, and don't worry about them, but I want to impress you with something. Nuclear fusion. Now, any place in the known universe, every advanced civilization is going to figure out that that's what powers the stars. Not just the sun, not just the stars in our galaxy, but throughout the universe. Nuclear fusion. What's the big deal? If you use the right stuff in the right way, you can kick particles out the back end of a rocket, like in that first equation up there. Doing something wrong. With 18.3 MeV, very scientific term, million electron volts. And you say, so what? Normal chemical reactions involve 1 to 10 electron volts. So in terms of amount of energy available, nuclear fusion, for us at least, is the ultimate. That doesn't mean it won't be surpassed by something better in the future. Technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. But the point is that here we are in 2012. We've joined the other advanced, in quotation marks, planets in the universe because we know about nuclear fusion. What's important about that is not that we can build better bombs, which is certainly true, but that it puts the stars within reach. And it is my firm belief that aliens don't want us out there because we are such a primitive society. Look at the progression. You heard the word blockbuster earlier today. In 1944, we had blockbuster bombs. The 10-ton blockbuster took a big B-29 to carry it, released the energy of 10 tons of TNT. That was 1944. 1945, our first fission nuclear weapon, 19,000 tons of TNT. 7 years later, we exploded our first H-bomb. You see a picture there. Okay. Just follow instructions. That's what he's... in 52, first H-bomb, 10 million tons of TNT. Think about that for a minute. And in addition, the Russians in a few years operated a much bigger one, 57 million tons of TNT in one bomb. 10 tons make a mess. 57 million tons is hell. So if you wonder why would anybody come to this unimportant planet out in the boonies, it's because we have shown signs of being able to get out there and take our brand of friendship, which is not, hello, how you doing? It's who can we kill next? That's a sad commentary. But if I were an alien, I certainly wouldn't want us out there. I don't think they do either. And there were 3 signs at the end of World War II that soon we would be going out. Soon meaning less than 100 years, which is nothing on a cosmic timescale. The 3 signs were nuclear weapons. Remembering now, we have exploded 2,000 of them. Powerful rockets. I can mess it up again, huh? We've exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons. We like to play with those things. Only 2 of them on people, fortunately. And we are a threat to the neighborhood. We destroyed 60 million of our own kind, killed that many people in World War II. 60 million. We destroyed 1,700 cities. We will this year spend $1 trillion on things military, while 20,000 children die every single day of preventable disease or starvation. Now, if you were an alien, what would you say about these guys here? Are you going to say, oh, we don't care about them, they're primitive, let them come out? No advanced civilization is going to say, let the idiots come out. So, I think, love them or hate them, respect them. We are lucky. They haven't destroyed us yet. They didn't spray us and, get rid of the vermin in the neighborhood in a hurry. Now, one of the nice things about nuclear fusion, incidentally, is you use the 2 lightest substances in the universe, hydrogen and helium. And they're all over the place, the 2 most abundant substances in the universe. So anybody who tells you you can't get here from there doesn't know what he or she is talking about. Can you buy a ticket tomorrow? Of course not. But we know the technology to get us to the stars. Why haven't we done it? Because it's very expensive. There are better ways of spending our money, and I'm glad we haven't done it. Because if we send somebody out there, it ought to be Earthlings, not Americans, Chinese, Cubans, Peruvians, whatever. Okay. But you can see why I say they'd be concerned about us. I read a paper not long ago where an astronomer was concerned about, they could tell that our CO2 level has gone up a bit in our atmosphere. They might come around and, be worried about us, that the planet is going to melt, it's going to get too hot. They're going to worry about that, and they're not going to worry about the fact that we've exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons? What a joke. Okay, I want to quickly move through some data just so that you know that there is evidence. I won't go through in great details. This is the biggest study ever done, Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. The Secretary of the Air Force lied to us about it. It was done way back in 1955. The press bought it hook, line, and sinker. They quoted the Secretary of the Air Force saying, on the basis of this report, we believe no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. That's what he said. He lied. I don't mean cheated a little bit, he lied. Here's the categories. You'll notice the unknowns, 21.5%. That's a long way from 3 when I learned arithmetic. You notice the next to the last category, insufficient information. He said if we had more data, we could explain everything. There was a separate category, insufficient information. And yet nonsense like that has been stated over and over and over again by the nasty, noisy negativists. We should not let them get away with such nonsense. There's the quote. Got it pretty much right. Here's what my University of Chicago classmate, Carl Sagan, said. More of the same. The reliable cases are uninteresting, and the interesting cases are unreliable. Unfortunately, there are no cases that are both reliable and interesting. Sounds good. Any reference? Well, no. Any data to back it up? Of course not. Here are the facts. The better the quality, the more likely to be unexplainable. 35% of the best cases could not be explained. Fewer than 20% of the poorest cases. And as you'd expect, as the quality goes down, the number that are insufficient information goes up. Let's have facts instead of proclamations. Let's not let them get away with it. Congressional hearings, testimony from 12 scientists. I was the only one without a PhD. I think I was the youngest one, too. I'm not sure if any of the original ones are still alive besides me. The best paper by Dr. James E. McDonald, professor of physics, University of Arizona. Talked to over 500 witnesses. His specialty was atmospheric physics. He presented data on 41 outstanding cases, multiple witness, radar visual cases, sightings by pilots, sightings by astronomers, sightings over big cities. Don't let the noisy negativists fool you into thinking, well, there really isn't any solid data. There's a lot of solid data. They don't want to look at it, of course. Even the University of Colorado study, 965 pages, we spent $539,000. If you read the newspapers, oh, there's nothing to flying saucers, nothing of interest. If you read the report, according to a special UFO subcommittee of the world's largest group of space scientists, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, 30% of the 117 cases studied in detail could not be identified. 30 is a long way from 0 or 3. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, it's amazing how a lot of the astronomers with the SETI movement, or the cult of SETI, or, silly effort to investigate, that's what I call them, you've heard it before. But a lot of them want to ignore the testimony of astronomers who have studied the evidence which they haven't studied. J. Allen Hynek was one of the contributors to the congressional hearings. In his book, he presented interesting information on 70 cases. He didn't say they can all be explained. Far from it. Why don't they reference his work, I wonder? This, just an advertisement, if you will. We have a table over there. There will be time, short, after the presentation to visit the vendor's room. And it's really incredible that the Air Force, there's only one case that they've really said a lot about, and that's Roswell. Here's this is their second report. The first volume, the Roswell Report, Truth versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert, they provided the fiction. This is the second one. In the first one, they said they're not going to say anything more about Roswell. So 3 years later, they said more. This is one of my favorite explanations. It's one of the silliest bits of nonsense. Now, crash test dummies. The dummy's the one in the middle, in case you're worried about that. I talked to the man on the right, Colonel Madsen, much after this, of course. He was retired when I talked to him. I met with him in person in Albuquerque. It's a pity the Air Force didn't. He pointed out that these crash test dummies were the same size and weight as pilots, 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, and you'll notice that it's in a uniform. That's not for show. If a pilot is going to get out of a high-powered jet at 40,000 feet, he's going to be in a uniform. And that affects the rate of fall, the drag, the heating, and everything else. None of these were dropped until 1953. And how do you convert a dummy like that into a 4-foot-tall guy with a big head and not in uniform? Only the noisy negativists and the Air Force, same thing, could assume such nonsense. I mean, you're going to tell me that the ranchers in New Mexico are going to find one of those dummies and say, oh my God, an alien invasion. Absurd. Now here's where you get to the crux of the matter for some people. Notice that statement. Whoops. How do I do that? Well, I've done it again, folks. Hit OK? I want to go back. Okay. Oh dear. The old clunkers are still around like me. The important thing is, he said, the demonstration that no possible combination of known substances, known forms of machinery, and known forms of force can be united in a practical machine by which man shall fly long distances through the air seems to this writer, an astronomer, outstanding one, as complete as it is possible for the demonstration of any physical fact to be. The date was October 1903. The Wright brothers' first flight was in December 1903. A distinguished scientist saying something stupid, really stupid. But that kind of statement has stood in the way of province in many different areas. That's what we talk about in our book, Science Was Wrong. When it's wrong, it can be very wrong. That's myself and Dr. Seth Shostak, one of the SETI cultists that I talk about in my book, Flying Saucers and Science. Now, we met on the Queen Elizabeth II. We each gave 3 lectures on a cruise from England to New York. We were cordial to each other. But in the course of my lecture, of course, I asked how many people had read each of those major scientific studies that I talked about. I talked about what was in them in more detail than today, and then how many have read it. He didn't raise his hand at all. We debated on coast-to-coast radio. And a vote was taken. I got 57% of the vote. Seth got 33%. 10% said, I don't know who won. But he really didn't know anything about flying saucers. Now, Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society, we debated on Coast to Coast. I got 80% of the vote because he clearly indicated with his first statement that he was out in left field. He said, the only reason there are sightings you can't explain is that there's about a 5% residue in any of these crazy phenomena. And of course, I talked about Blue Book Special Report 14, 21.5%, and the Condon Committee 30%, and several other sources of data. And I got 80% of the vote with him. And I'd love to debate these guys again, but I would bet pretty strongly that they wouldn't be willing to do it because they'd have to do some homework. And the SETI claim is that there is no evidence for UFOs. They never cite the large-scale scientific studies. I read their books. They won't read mine. Now, I must admit, Seth said on Coast to Coast that he had my book on his nightstand. He didn't say he'd read it. On the nightstand. Very convenient. And I sent it to him with his permission. This was not, out of the blue. A good movie, incidentally, by James Fox. Now, it is interesting to consider what history will think about these guys in the future. A cult movement based on crazy assumptions and ignoring the relevant data. Why would anybody in his right mind out there send us a radio message? They're going to ask for an appointment for lunch? Why would they use technology appropriate to us? Our first long-distance radio call was in 1901, Marconi. Does he really think they're stuck at that level? Now, I talk about the Betty and Barney Hill case. You heard a lecture from Kathy about that, and other abduction cases. And the base stars that come out of a star map, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but there are two stars that are only 39 light years away, and they're 1 billion years older than the sun, and they're 30 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. And they're stuck at our level of technology? That's absurd. Quite frankly absurd. Now, Seth has an answer for that. They listened to these two stars and they didn't hear any signal. Must be nobody there. Now, the obvious corollary, well, you haven't heard a signal from any of those stars you've listened to, so does that mean there's nobody out there? So why are you listening? I don't know why they're listening. You know, it's the story of the drunk who's scrambling around under the street light, and a cop comes, "What are you doing?" "I'm looking for my keys." "Well, where did you lose them?" "Oh, down the street there near my car." "Why are you looking here?" "Well, there's more light here." I'm not much of a raconteur, you can tell that. There's Jill Tarter. Dr. Tarter just resigned from her position of using radio telescopes to listen for signals. She will continue on to raise money for SETI. She said, "You can't stop thinking about it when you've been working on the big brass ring of thought that will change man's life forever, searching for that. How could you stop?" So picking up a signal from another star system is going to change everything on planet Earth. Why? "Marge, did you hear about that radio signal we picked up?" "Yeah, George, pass the sugar." Now, what if you were to say, "Oh, aliens are coming and they landed 3 blocks down and abducted a couple of people there"? That might change everybody's view about everything. So my next column in the MUFON Journal, and I appreciate the nice words some of you have said to me about my columns. None of you said anything bad because I thought you were afraid I would say something bad to you. She's 68, nice lady. You may recognize her from the movie, or from the Peter Jennings mockumentary of February 2005. She and her husband were flying their plane and they saw a light through the clouds. "Oh no, not a UFO." It turned out to be the moon. That's the best you could come up with, a simulated UFO. And then there's Stephen Hawking, brilliant astrophysicist, theoretical cosmologist, whatever. "If advanced life exists, they'll contact us. Aliens haven't contacted us so far." Why would he say that? How does he know that? Is he hooked into the telegraph station, carrying the signals from the stars? Why would they contact us? Did Columbus send smoke signals to the natives? How does he know they haven't contacted us? Well, surely if there are aliens, they would talk to the SETI people, right? Hardly. Dr. Woolley, the British Astronomer Royal at the time, and he was quoted in Time magazine about space travel. "It's utter bilge. I don't think anybody will ever put up enough money to do such a thing. What good would it do us? If we spent the same amount of money on preparing first-class astronomical equipment, we would learn much more about the universe. It's all rather rot." That was 1 year before Sputnik went up. And what field of science has benefited the most from the space program? Astronomy. The Hubble and all the other stuff out there. Now, one of Seth's comments when we were both on Larry King was that governments can't keep secrets. The proof of that is look what a lousy job they did with FEMA on Katrina. Look at the bad shape of the post office. What is the connection? I didn't hear him say NSA, NSC, CIA, DIA, ONI, OSI, NRO. They're the ones who keep secrets. Now, admittedly, a scientific colleague of his, Dr. Tyson, head of Hayden Planetarium, he told an audience that, look, the proof that the government can't keep secrets is clear. Look how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Very funny remark. What's it got to do with the question at hand? Absolutely nothing. This is one of a whole bunch of top secret Umbra, code word, CIA UFO documents. You can read, well, I'll say 7 words, 6.5, something like that. I got loads of these. And people say to me, Stan, why don't you just scrape off the black and see what's underneath? Because the CIA people aren't idiots. They Xerox first. So if you scrape off the black, there ain't nothing under there. No cover-up. There's another one just to show you. I wasn't just showing you one. This is an NSA document. They got smart. When I called them, because I'd heard they were releasing a bunch of documents, I gave her my name, and she said, oh, I know about you. That got me worried for a minute. What's the NSA know about me? Well, it turns out Philip Klass had told them that Friedman shows those other documents all blacked out, and he forgets to tell people that these are classified because it's sources and methods information. So they released 156 NSA UFO documents on which you can read one sentence. And all the rest is sources and methods information. Now, if you want to believe that, go ahead. There are a lot of fantasy fairy tales out there you can believe as well. They think we're stupid. Whited out isn't as impressive as blacked out. And after you've looked at your first 150 of these, you say, this is pretty stupid, isn't it? Are they covering anything up? You're darn right they're covering anything up, something, lots of something. These are all pre-1980, mind you. NSA means never says anything, or no such agency if you prefer that. National Security Agency if you're curious. Here's a great statement. Air Force General Carol Bolender was asked to evaluate Project Blue Book when the Condon Committee suggested it be dropped. He had nothing to do with it. He was working on a lunar excursion module. At the end of '69, October, he put out a memo, which we didn't see until at least 10 years later. Reports of UFOs which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system, and they will continue to be investigated after Blue Book closes. That's a little variation on the quote. I spoke with General Bolender years later. I said, it sounds like you're saying that there are 2 separate channels of communication. That stuff which affects national security, say a saucer going down the runway at a Strategic Air Command base where nuclear weapons are stored, that's a security issue. If we all go outside, wouldn't that be a spectacular end of the meeting, and see a saucer flying over? It happens all the time. I don't know what Newfound's count is for this last month, but typically it's been running over 600 sightings a month. So no big deal. And Bolender agreed there were 2 separate channels of communication. Yet the Air Force, ever since 1969, is saying we don't have anything to do with UFOs anymore. He said they will continue to be investigated, the sightings that could affect national security. And the Air Force officially says, oh, there's no national security consideration here. More lying. I don't like being lied to. I respect security. I worked under it for 14 years. And sometimes you have to tiptoe around the truth a little bit, not to release classified information. That's different from flat out lying. And no, I don't want everything disclosed. I think there are some legitimate national security issues here, but I don't like lying either. This has a chapter on going into how to get to the stars, on the large-scale scientific sources, on the cult of SETI, on the reasons why aliens would come here. It's not just because we're bad guys. In case you didn't notice, we have a lot of resources on this planet, and people say nobody would go to another solar system to pick up mined metals. Well, not copper or iron or aluminum. How about gold? Was it $1,600 an ounce? How about rare earths? There are a lot of things that are pretty darn valuable. Copper's 20 cents an ounce. $1,600 is a long way from that. Incidentally, the Earth is the densest planet in the solar system. We're not talking about the people. That's another question. But average cubic foot of Earth weighs more than the average cubic foot of any other planet. That means more heavy metals, exotic things like osmium, rhenium, platinum, tungsten. You know what uranium was used for 100 years ago? Yellow glaze for kitchen table pottery. That's illegal now, incidentally. And if you have any, you shouldn't really keep it because it is radioactive. Top secret magic. There are some people who are very upset when I say that 3 of the more than 100 MJ-12, Majestic 12 documents are legitimate, and the most important classified documents ever leaked to the public. This book goes into all the arguments made against that. It's very popular to take pot shots. Everybody knows those documents are fraudulent. Only Friedman thinks they're real, etc., ad nauseum. One of the intriguing things is the people who were on the MJ-12 committee, which is one of the things that bothers the disbelievers. Well, before we get to that, you'll recognize Philip Klass, one of the noisiest negativists of them all, the late Philip Klass. One of those MJ-12 documents, he sent a rather snide letter to me saying, perhaps you didn't notice that the typeface was the large pica type. But I have 9 National Security Council documents, NSC is mentioned, and they're all done in the small elite type. I challenge you to find any other genuine documents, meaning he gave a whole bunch of criteria, got to be signed and so forth. And I will pay you $100 each, up to a maximum of 10 for 10. He had never been to the Eisenhower Library. He'd gotten his stuff by mail. I sent him 20 from my files done in pica type. I've spent a lot of time at the Eisenhower Library. I knew he would reject most of them. He accepted 2. And I think he thought he had me, because he told everybody about challenging me. Well, I was going to the Eisenhower Library, and I picked up 14 that met all his criteria, done in the same size and style type. And I sent him copies in an invoice for $1,000, and he paid me. There's the proof of it right in front of you. And then he got mad. His father was a lawyer. He threatened to sue me for printing that check. I said, Phil, you sent me a check. I Xeroxed it. I took the check to the bank. They cashed it. I can do whatever I darn please with that Xerox. He didn't say anything more. But it's typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. I like the way that sounds. The Eisenhower Library alone has 250,000 pages of National Security Council material. 250,000. How could anybody in his right mind, oh, that's the problem, isn't it, say that they all, if you got 9, they should all be done in the same typeface. If you had 99 out of 100, okay, I'll buy it. From 9 to 250,000 makes no sense whatsoever. And I mention it only because we need to know the feebleness of the arguments of the nasty, noisy negativists. We can't sit back and let them get away with nonsense, which is what they try to do. Yeah, Operation Majestic 12 was real. And there aren't any good anti-arguments, as I point out in that book. This is the famous Betty and Barney Hill and their dog. That's not the strange creatures I'm interested in. I'll see. And the reason for showing you this is the star map that Betty described as being seen on board the craft. And when it was published in The Interrupted Journey back in the mid-'60s by John Fuller, best-selling book all over the place, there it sits, and how do you make sense out of it? What does it mean? We got no names. These were the base stars, heavy trade routes, light trade routes, occasional expeditions. We'll never know. Well, a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish did something nobody else had ever done. She built a total of like 27 different three-dimensional models like the one you see here. Those are beads, colored beads hung on fish line. And the idea was to put the stars in their proper three-dimensional location, look at it from all different directions, and see if you could find a three-dimensional pattern that matched the two-dimensional one that Betty had drawn. And Betty was instructed, only draw it if you can remember it accurately. Dr. Simon was like that. She drew it, Marjorie built her models. At first she found no pattern that matched, and the second one, no pattern that matched. She kept eliminating certain kinds of stars. And pretty soon she found one pattern that matched, angle for angle, line length for line length. It was a happy day for Marjorie. I was the first to publish about it because I got asked to help her, not that she needed it, but by the head of APRO, the Aerophenomenon Research Organization. And we both spoke at a MUFON conference in Cleveland, which I helped out kind of. Marjorie was much better at talking to astronomers than to general people. She's a brilliant woman. And the identity of those base stars, as I mentioned before, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli, that's the constellation of Reticulum, the net. And they're just 39 light years away. And I get irked when I hear people say, look how much energy it would take to get to the next galaxy. I don't care about the next galaxy. Andromeda's 2 million light years away. Zeta Reticuli is 39 light years away. I wonder what my wife would say if she says, we need some bread for dinner. Oh, okay, I'll be back next week. I'm going to that great bakery down in Sydney, Australia. Wonderful bread. The superstore is 1.5 miles away. We need it for dinner tonight. So why would you worry about another galaxy? There's almost 2,000 stars within 55 light years of here. People think they would ignore us? We've given them plenty of reason to pay attention to us. In the story, and don't be fooled by the fact that my name is first. I complained to the publisher when he showed me the mock-up of the cover. I said, this is Kathy's book. He said, Stan, you're better known. It will sell more this way. Now, what do you say when the publisher says that? Oh, I don't care about how many it sells. No. So I'm not taking credit for her work. She did the great majority of the work. There's Kathy. She's in the front row. She didn't bring along her little friend. Did you try to pick up that trophy? It's heavy. And there are cute sneakers that he's wearing, too. Then there's Roswell. And I've heard more nonsense. I'm the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident, starting way back in the 70s. And I've heard an awful lot of nonsense about Roswell. It's everybody's favorite target. If they want to get publicity, Annie Jacobson wrote a book about Area 51, in which for some crazy reason she threw in the notion. It's really a very creative solution. Joseph Mengele, Dr. Death, working for Joseph Stalin, came up with some strange creatures genetically deformed and so forth. And the idea was to put them in a German Horten Brothers flying wing and have it crash in the United States, and there would be a repeat of the War of the Worlds panic. There's a little problem with that. The War of the Worlds broadcast was portrayed as a live news broadcast about something happening in New Jersey, the most densely populated of all the states. And if you believed the broadcast, the Martians were here destroying buildings and people. You had a right to panic. What could we do against the Martians in 1938? Now, I was living in New Jersey at the time, but I can't say that I listened to the show. I didn't. How do you compare that with dumping a German vehicle out in the middle of nowhere? And the Brazil Ranch, where the Roswell event took place, is really in the middle of nowhere. I took a bunch of Japanese journalists out there one time from the museum in Roswell. We went 54 miles without seeing another person or another vehicle. You can't do that in Japan. They were kind of shook up by how isolated things were. That explanation doesn't work. Somebody else said they had deformed Japanese to do radiation shielding experiments. They were hung in a fugal balloon with Horten Brothers technology. And again, no evidence for that either. Let me see, there are several other crazy explanations, but enough said. The evidence is overwhelming, and read Don Schmidt's book with Tom Carey, Witness to Roswell. That's one of the two books that are optioned to make a movie, Magic Men, about MJ-12 and Roswell and the ups and downs of research. And as Don will tell you, there are a lot of ups and downs. We will talk about some of the crazy explanation, I hope, in the movie anyway. I can't tell you when it's going to be out. Bryce Zabel and Donnie Most, they've written a screenplay. They're up to version number 4, I guess. Now all they need, just in case there's anybody interesting, is money enough to make the film. A few $1 million would probably get them started anyway, and then get other investors. What I'm hoping is it gets made before I die. You know, the other movie they're working on, incidentally, is Betty and Barney, a movie of the captured book. So I might have the honor of having 2 of my books with my name on it being made into movies. I insist that Richard Dreyfuss play me in Magic Men. Somebody says he's too handsome. Well, we'll forget that. But Roswell was an important event, and it's important to realize, you can see from the map, there's Roswell over here. There's the White Sands Missile Range, largest military base in the United States. You got to have a big base if you're firing missiles around. You really don't want to land them on people, or cows even. Incidentally, if you want to see Trinity Site, which is right over there where man's first atomic bomb was exploded, come with me on a tour in October. We're going to see Trinity Site. It's only open 2 days a year. We'll see Roswell, we'll see Los Alamos, we'll see a whole bunch of interesting and exciting museums and White Sands Missile Range and so forth. In case you don't know it, there aren't many people in New Mexico. So you won't be bothered by huge crowds. Even in Roswell during festival, there were a few thousand people there. Crash at Corona, book about Roswell with Don Berliner. It's one of the early books, but it gives you the feel for how things came into be that we got into investigating it and so forth. And it hopefully puts to rest the crazy notion that people have said to me, Stan, why did all those people come running to you to tell you about Roswell? The answer is they didn't. I had to go looking for them. I wish those people would pay my phone bill. Bill Moore and I, in a year and a half, found 62 people before the internet. A lot of work. You heard about Kingman today. Here's a brand new book, The Aztec Incident. Aztec is in the northwest corner of New Mexico. The Four Corners area, it's called, or 4 states come together in one place. This just came out in May. Scott and Suzanne Ramsey have spent a heck of a lot of money, done an enormous amount of work to lay to rest the crazy notion that this was all a hoax, nothing to the case, blah, blah, blah. They've done a remarkable job. I wrote the foreword. Suzanne lives up, or her family is up in that part of the state. Made it a little easier for the traveling. But you'd be amazed at how much evidence there is. Now, an important part of that is that people in Aztec don't talk readily to strangers. They had to work to find local people they could work through to talk to other local people who were involved in the case. And Scott even hired an engineer whose job it was to see how do you get huge pieces of equipment, power plant equipment usually, from point A to point B. When you got bridges, you got tunnels, you got other places, you know, how do you move large stuff? They went over the whole route as it was in 1948. This happened in March 1948. And the guy that Scott hired, who was a friend of his dad's, was not a believer in flying saucers. They went over the whole trip, drove it as well as looking at old maps. And his conclusion, the expert, was that indeed in 1947, as the roads, bridges, etc. were, you could move a large object. This one, I'll say, softly landed. It didn't crash. It wasn't in little pieces. No question it could be moved from Aztec over to Los Alamos. How many more have fallen out of the sky? I don't know. We'll wait to see what the story is on Kingman. I listened to the talk today. I'm not sure it was a blockbuster, but at least something to think about. And there are other cases around the world. The idea is hopefully other people will come forward when they see the story that's presented here. Now, some of you may not recognize these two, Chase Brandon and Lee Spiegel. It's not a comic team. Chase Brandon worked for the CIA for more than 30 years. And he was well known as being the CIA consultant to Hollywood when they were making movies that might involve the CIA in some way or another. For two reasons: to make it look more realistic and to make sure they didn't say anything that the CIA didn't want said. Lee works for Huffington Post. And Chase Brandon came out with a blockbuster about a month ago. He's written some science fiction books. And he stated that in the late 90s, he happened to be at a place, sort of an archive of the CIA where they stored old stuff. And he saw a box marked Roswell. He had an appropriate clearance. He opened it up. And inside he found pictures and text which convinced him that indeed Roswell was real and extraterrestrial and involved cadavers. Nice turn of phrase. Now, he probably stepped beyond where he should have. The CIA can hardly sue him for breaking security because they'd have to admit that he was telling the truth. And Lee has talked with him. And what got me about this story is that, when I first heard it, is that the producer of my movie, UFOs Are Real, was named Brandon Chase. So my first thought is somebody's playing games here. Well, his real name is Charles, but everybody called him Chase. And Lee has met with them, as you can see. That's not a finagled picture. He does a great job for Huffington Post. And this story led the list. They got over 1 million hits in 3 days. I mention that because it means people are interested. You don't need to hide you're interested. A lot of people are interested. So this story, we probably haven't heard the end of the story. Of course, there were people who said, oh, he probably never worked for the CIA. Well, I've talked to grad students in England looking at Hollywood and the intelligence community, and who have known about his involvement with Hollywood productions for years. No question he is who he says he is. And strictly a coincidence, I guess, between Chase Brandon and Brandon Chase. science was wrong. It's not just a plug. It's very important for all of us to realize that often pronouncements from on high are wrong because they're made by people who don't want to admit that they don't know all there is to know. And that includes about medicine, it includes about flying saucers, it includes about interstellar travel. There's a whole long list of things. Kathy and I each did 7 chapters here. One of them is about abductions. One of them is about UFOs. There's a whole bunch of others. And it's fascinating. It's disturbing, frankly, when you see how many people died because of the strong resistance to inoculations against smallpox. People who say, that's God's way of controlling the population. What difference does it make if your kid gets smallpox? Well, it makes a lot of difference to the people involved. But progress was delayed for years because big shots had a strong statement to make. So there's a moral to the story, in other words. It's not just rockets and things like that. This is a bunch of books for you to read. Now, I'll admit, I hate to admit this, but I get people saying, well, Stan, I don't read many books anymore. You got any DVDs? I think they're hoping I'll say no and they can go away. Yeah, there's several different DVDs out there. If you want to watch instead of read, go ahead. But let's face it, you can read a lot more words in an hour than you can listen to. So if you want a lot of information, reading books is a good idea. And you can underline them too. I guess some people don't like that idea, but I mark up my books, the ones I own, not library books, please. And yes, I still go to libraries. And if there's any newspaper men out there, I bet you'd increase your circulation if you'd start carrying serious stories about flying saucers instead of the stuff you've been carrying. Here's the newest book by our publisher, Career Press. And you'll notice I've got 2 articles in there. Don has one, Kathleen has one. It's 2011. So it's a wide variety of topics, but intriguing reading. I like exposed, uncovered, and declassified. It sounds sharp. We have a few copies out there. Now, here's a controversial book by John Alexander, who's had a lot of clearances at the International UFO Conference, not this past year, but the year before. We had a little debate, moderated by a lawyer who did most of the talking. It was hard for me to get hard to believe. It was hard for me to get a word in edgewise, because I disagree with John about a number of things. He thinks there is no cover-up because he asked a lot of people around Washington to tell him where this truly secret work is going on. Nobody could answer the question, so he figured there isn't any. I asked him a question he's never answered. How many times did you tell classified information to people without a need to know and an appropriate clearance? He didn't have such a clearance. Why would he expect anybody to tell him anything? So he and I disagree about the book, and I certainly disagree with what he says about MJ-12 because I pointed out the error of the things he said. Here's a book by Leslie Kean. She's done an excellent job. She lets government officials, pilots, others, tell their own story. It's powerful stuff. I mean, from all over the world. You don't think there's anything going on? Read this. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. And Podesta worked for President Clinton. Okay. Thank you. So I recommend the book. I'm not selling it. It's nice to be recognized by your peers. This was in the St. John newspaper, St. John, New Brunswick, after they carried an article saying that I'd been inducted into the Roswell UFO Hall of Fame. And I kind of like it. I mean, if you're going to have a cartoon, at least it ought to treat you decently, I think. Now, maybe that's making too much of myself by saying I'm their peers, but, you know, to each his own. But it proves you can get halfway decent coverage anyway. Here's kind of the overview, I guess. This year, planet Earth, our world, despite many starving people, will spend over $1 trillion on military activities. Would Earthlings use their technology for destruction of people? Definitely. During World War II, we destroyed 1,700 cities. We killed 60 million Earthlings. Some people say it's 70 million, but I'm conservative, you know that. Any rational civilization in our neighborhood would rightly expect that we would be a menace to all those more advanced civilizations in the neighborhood once we got out there. And we're heading out. Thanks for listening. Thank you. I would like to take some questions. Can we get the lights up, John? And people come to the microphone over here. Because I usually find people have questions. Don't be shy. I don't bite. Not often, anyway.
Go ahead. Thanks. I really enjoyed your presentation, Stanton. When we heard Nick Pope speak the other night, he mentioned some reasons that aliens might be visiting. When you look at the big picture over all these years, do some reasons they would visit us seem more likely to you than others?
Well, I think so. The question was reasons for aliens to visit. There's a whole chapter in my book, Flying Saucers and Science. But one of them, as I've said, it's because we're a threat to the neighborhood. Anybody be crazy to let us go out there with our attitudes, our capabilities, and the ability to destroy. Another reason is to mine the resources. A third is we're somebody's colony. My favorite kind of colony is a penal colony. They dumped all their bad boys and girls here a long time ago, and that's why we're so nasty to each other. And you say, that's pretty silly, until I was surprised when I went down to Australia. They're proud of their convict background. They really are. People in Georgia aren't so proud of theirs, as far as I know. There were convicts there, too. They also might be graduate students doing their thesis research on the development of a primitive society. They might be broadcasters with a weekly show, Idiocy in the Boondocks. They might be setting up, a center for a honeymoon capital of this corner of the neighborhood. Wouldn't that be an exciting honeymoon? Go visit the Earthlings? Ha! Well, some people like to take strange honeymoons. There's a bunch more because, step back a minute. If you go to the Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky airport here, how many reasons are there for people to travel? An awful lot. They're not all there for the same reason. Visit Aunt Minnie, have a secret honeymoon with a girlfriend that nobody knows about, all kinds of reasons. Thesis research. So I think there are a lot of reasons for beings to travel. But in our case, I think the primary reason is that we're a threat to the neighborhood. You got to keep tabs on the primitives. It's a little late if they show up at your doorstep with their nuclear weapons aimed at you. You got to go check them out beforehand. And all the evidence is they've been coming around here for thousands of years. If you want a good book, incidentally, that gets into that sort of thing, you might try The Bible and Flying Saucers by Dr. Barry Downing. Barry is still a religious consultant to MUFON, as far as I know. He has a bachelor's in physics and a doctor of divinity. Divine physics, that's his beat. He goes through the Old and New Testament, and it looks like they've been coming here a long time. So who knows? I mean, there may be, I like to point out to people that there was a major world chess championship conducted on Iceland. So who knows what reasons they might have for coming here. Yeah.
Stanton, regarding Chase Brandon, one of the most commonly voiced skeptical comments since that came out has been that if the CIA is legitimately covering up this event, they would not leave a box laying around labeled Roswell. They would rather have it labeled some innocuous label.
Well, the box wasn't laying around. It was in a classified facility with lots of other boxes of artifacts. Presumably, believe it or not, the government agencies do collect clippings on things that are appropriate. I've talked to people, and that's one of the areas CIA was collecting clippings on, the Air Force too. So I don't think it was lying around.
Well, perhaps not lying around, but still labeled in that manner. I mean,
might have been in letters 1 inch high. You know, and he's looking around and, gee, wonder what's here. Roswell? He got curious. Look, I wasn't there. I would love to talk to him.
Some even speculate that they wanted him to find it if they labeled it so.
This was back in the 90s. I can't believe that they were planted for somebody to go public with in 2012. So it's one of those inadvertent things, I think. And there is a real question, of course, why does he say something now? He's known about it since the late 90s.
True.
He's pushing his science fiction book, and maybe that's why. And people have asked me, well, do you think he crossed the line? And I have to say yes. If it's a black project that they know about Roswell, then by even saying what he said, without revealing what was in the documents or the text or the pictures, he had crossed the line. So I don't have all the answers. I'd love to get to talk to him about it.
Thank you.
Stan, quick question, quick answer, please. What is your ideal idea of disclosure that what we need to know? If you could.
Say that again?
What is your ideal idea of disclosure by the U.S. government, what we need to know versus what you don't think we need to know? You
What
touched
is
on that
the
earlier a
ideal-
little bit.
John, I'm having trouble understanding the words.
What do you think the U.S. government should disclose versus what do you think they should not disclose about UFOs and
What
crashes?
do I think they should not disclose about UFOs?
And what do you think, well, what do you think they should
Okay.
versus?
Okay, now I understand. I am not part of the disclosure movement because I think there is a legitimate national security issue here. I think if we learned any technology from what we've picked up, from wreckage, whether it's Aztec or Roswell or Varginha or any place else, then I don't think that should be put out on the table unless the Russians, the Chinese, India, Pakistan, everybody else puts what they have out on the table. Be utterly ridiculous. So I think what should be done is that an announcement should be made by highly trusted individuals around the world. A little hard to find anybody. My favorite choice would be the Queen and the Pope. Well, it's an odd couple, but they're about the same age. They are actually about the same age. Saying that indeed our planet is being visited. We have it on the best authority. And we are announcing that there will be international conferences considering the philosophical, psychological, economic, religious implications of those visitations. And because I think it's a whole new ballgame. We're at the moment in time where we switched over to another view, where we should switch over. First there was Ptolemy, a Greek philosopher who said, the earth is the center of the universe. Anybody can tell that. Go outside and look. The stars, the moon, the sun, they all go around the earth, right? Okay, Copernicus came along in 1543. He had the gall to write a book in which he said, believe it or not, that the earth wasn't the center of the universe, the sun was. he was fortunate he died that same year that the book was published, and somebody else was burned at the stake for agreeing with him, and the book was repressed by the Catholic Church for 300 years. Okay? Now, we suddenly realize that thanks to Kepler, the Kepler satellite, which is looking at an area of the sky as big as my fist at arm's length. Can it look at Zeta Reticuli? No, it cannot. It's going out in the same orbit over and over again. It can't look anywhere near the sun and so forth. Now we're saying that unlike Frank Drake, who a few years ago said there ought to be as many as 10,000 places in the galaxy that could communicate, based on Kepler now we'd say it's more likely that there are 10 billion. What that means is we're not important. Lots of solar systems, lots of beings more advanced than we are, unless you still believe that the Earth was created in 4004 BC, I think it was October 25th, I'm not sure. Bishop Ussher came up with that. And incidentally, Pat Robertson has loudly proclaimed, we are the only intelligent life in the universe. What an insult to God that is. This is the best she can do. And he says, within the last 2 weeks, he has said, anybody who believes that there's other intelligent life out there, he said the UFO stuff is the work of the devil. Any who believes there's intelligent life out there should be publicly stoned to death. Here I am. So what I think we should be told is that aliens are visiting. This has important implications, and maybe it's the best way we Earthlings can start acting like intelligent beings instead of spending that $1 trillion a year on things. I mean, I'm sure some companies would not be happy with what I just said, but I'll need a couple bodyguards when I leave here. Yes?
Yes, I'd like your opinion on something that I've been thinking about. We all like to speculate about the motives of aliens out there. It's a lot of what we've been doing here. I wonder if, in your opinion, is it possible, almost even speculate about a truly alien intentions and how they think?
A truly alien what?
A truly alien mind or intelligence.
What about
Is it possible something so foreign, is it possible to assign a motive to that?
Well, look, there may be all kinds of intelligent life out there, some of whom don't give a darn about us, and some of whom aren't in technology. And, you know, some of the SETI guys would like to think if we're going to get anybody in contact with us, it's going to be a robot, of course. I don't buy that. I think that every advanced civilization will be concerned about the need for finding a place to go if there's a supernova, if there's an asteroid hit, if you've exhausted the resources of the planet. We used to think everything just went on the way it was. What do you mean the continents move? It took 40 years to get continental drift accepted. Any 10-year-old can tell you, look at the globe and you'll see it's true. But, so I think that there may be all kinds of societies out there with all kinds of thinking. If they were nasty, I figured they'd have gotten rid of us already. So I scratched that one. If they're concerned about themselves, then I can understand why they'd be coming here. What if we were somebody's colony? What if they planted us here? Maybe they have a proprietary concern. So I think aliens will be concerned about perpetuating their own kind and their life as it is. Do you realize how rapidly the population on this planet has increased? We're reaching saturation, I think. We are not taking the measures we need to take to assure a good future for our great-grandchildren. I have a great-grandson, so I can say that. I'm not satisfied we're going in the right direction. And I don't expect aliens to come down and say, here's the recipe, folks, here's what you got to do. We wouldn't pay any attention. But I think it is appropriate to be concerned about how they would feel about us leaving to go out there. John, you think that's it? Unfortunately. Oh, well, too bad. Thank you. Hey, that's pretty good, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Stan, and thank all of you for your patience. I always hate